Thank you for listening to the Radio Maria podcast on the world family of Radio Maria stations.
Thank you so much for listening to the Radio Maria podcasts. It's thanks to listeners like you who donate that enable us to continue delivering quality content to listeners around the world. If you'd like to contribute and help us keep spreading the message of Our Lady's Son, please consider making a donation. You can reach us at 888-408-0201 or simply visit our donations tab on our website at radiomaria.us. Your generosity truly makes a difference.
You're listening to Radio Maria, a Christian voice in your home. We now bring you Marian Apparitions with Mary Pyper.
Welcome, everyone. So glad to be with you today on this glorious Wednesday. I hope everybody celebrated all weekend long, not just the 4th of July, but Independence Day. 250 years ago, independence was won. It was a hard fight. It was a bloody battle, but we emerged victorious. And yet, today, we're facing very much the same kind of tyranny that we faced back then. And revolution is in the air. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. But let's go back to Pope St. John Paul II and his prophetic warnings to the United States. Because 50 years ago, he predicted exactly, I wouldn't say predicted, he foresaw what was happening in the culture already, and that we didn't realize at that point, until he pointed it out, that we are in a collision course. And that collision is between a culture of freedom and a culture of death. So back 50 years ago, he came before he was Pope in his historic visit during the Eucharistic Congress in Philadelphia. And he challenged Americans, all of us, to embrace true moral responsibility, warning that unchecked liberty without objective truth inevitably destroys democracy and human dignity. And boy, was he right. More so than we could have ever thought back then. We saw the warning signs, and he did too, but he saw a greater vision. And that vision has affected how our country operates today, how we see ourselves, how society sees the family, most especially, and all the things that keep us in a moral universe. And when he talked about embracing true moral responsibility, that's where it all comes back to, right? What is the moral responsibility? What's moral? What's not moral? What's true? What's not true? All those basic things that help to shape who we are individually and as a country. So we're going to dive into that this morning because many of the historic speeches, I think they were very historic, that we heard over the weekend. If you haven't had a chance to listen to them, please do, by the president, as well as other dignitaries from around the world who chimed in, and also those who now hold political office in New York City and elsewhere that are democratic socialists, they call themselves, also known as communists. And so, once again, we go back to Pope John Paul II and how he saw. And I think the reason he was able to see so clearly in such a wide range, 50 years before everything, was because he grew up in a society where communism ruled. So he saw and lived personally through all the aspects and what the results were. Even going to so far as to, he could have been easily killed had he been, found out to be going to an underground seminary. He could have been in one of the death camps. And thank the Lord that he protected him so that we could have a pontiff who steered us, who gave us the truth, who gave us what moral responsibility means, and what freedom and liberty actually mean as well. So he did such an amazing job, giving us a catechism of the Catholic Church, so we knew what the Church taught, the truths of the Church, the truths that were, have always been and will continue to be, and how they would be attacked with Without objective truth, inevitably he calls for the destruction of democracy and human dignity. He knew the causes, and he lived through those, so he was able to see that even from afar here in America. So let's look at some of the main core things that he pointed out to us, that either we said, oh, that was right, that's not right, or this is right, or it could be, but we ignored the prophets. Just like in the Bible, over and over again, they send all the great prophets to warn the people to turn back to God, to turn back to the moral life of the Creator of the universe, and who we are as His creation, and what our responsibilities are, and how we should act and not act. That's the Ten Commandments, my friends. So many times we think of all that as being old. Well, there's a reason why it still endures today, and it's meant to. It's because it's truth. And that can't be, it can be argued, but truth cannot change. And so that's where freedom versus license comes in. JP2 frequently praised the American founding, particularly the moral truths embedded in our Declaration of Independence. Nowhere else do you find that in founding documents around the world. However, he warned that America's future was threatened by a concept of freedom disconnected from moral truth, turning individual rights into selfish license. And we see that all the time, right? I've talked about that recently here because I see it coming even to in the newer generations of people, especially the very young. They're being taught in the institutions of higher learning, as they keep calling themselves, and I'm not so sure they are institutions of higher learning. In fact, they're going back to baseless doctrines and theories and unproved, unscientific. We've gone backwards, and it's just like with everything is based in the material world on the unseen immaterial world that is all around us. And that means that when we do things, there are ripple effects that we see and many that are unseen. But that does not mean that they're not happening. So when we disconnect from moral truth, then anything goes. All the relativism that we've talked about for ages, and how many young people are very quick to climb on board with relativism. Well, and why not, right? Because you can do what you want no matter what it is, whether it's killing your baby in your womb, whether it's using people sexually and otherwise, using people as slave labor, basically, with unfair wages and just a callous disregard for human beings in particular. And that we are seeing escalate by the day. So all of these freedoms that we have, they've been fought over for all 250 years, because everybody, as soon as they get comfortable, they start to wander a little bit, wander from the truth, wander from their moral compass, or even to think about it, right? All they do is just react instead of actually thinking. So JP2 was so big on reminding us that, we can't just do what we want. There is a truth. There is moral law. And that morality, created by our Lord and Savior, by the God of the universe, cannot be changed by us as mere humans to just do what we want, when we want, based on what everybody else is doing at the time. So the progressivism that has invaded many forms, in many places and many institutions, including the church, has brought about a confusion. And when you're talking about chaos and conflict, well, we know who's behind that, right? The devil, because he is the father of lies, and he likes to stir things up. And when our Lord stirs things up, you can see the moral principles behind it that go back to the early days of creation, because there is a moral law, there is a right, and there is a wrong, and we are children of God. So because we are children of God, we can't do what we like. We have to do what we know is right. And if we don't know what is right, then that's on us too, because there's no reason that we shouldn't know what is morally right. All we need to do is take some time away from our screens, or could do it on screens too if it's from a good site, a good reliable site, and know your faith. Know what the teachings of the church are, because Mother Church has been trying to guide us for over 2,000 years to keep us on the straight and narrow. And that's not in a punitive way, but in a loving way, because many times when we get off that straight and narrow and we get onto the wide path to destruction, then our lives are not happy, because we're not seeking the greater good. We're not seeking the greater good for ourselves or for others. And what's the greater good? Eternity, life with the Lord forever in heaven. That is true happiness. And how do we obtain it? Well, if we know our catechism, then we know the purpose of our life. It's just to come to know, love, and serve the Lord in this life so we can be with him forever in the next. Years ago, there was a book that was wildly famous, and it caught everybody off guard at how popular it was. And it soared and stayed at the number one book for so many, actually a couple years. And it's The Purpose-Driven Life. And I believe the reason why it was so fabulously popular is because people never really thought about what the purpose of life was. It was more like, I'm here, I'm at this age, I'm at this school, I'm at this work, I'm at this company, I have this family. So it was all reacting. And it's just what you did. You saw other people, go to college, so you went to college without discerning if that was even right for you when you were bankrupting your future with the thousands of loans. And I'm here to testify that I didn't really think it through. I might have made a completely different choice had I even thought about that there were options. But that's what everybody did, so that's what we did. And that kind of mindset can get us into deep trouble. What are we always telling our kids? Well, if they jump off a bridge, are you going to follow them? Well, my friends, many people are jumping off bridges today into drugs, into pornography, into materialism, into all kinds of things that are destroying their lives and ending the happiness that they could have or did know when they were disciples of the Lord. So freedom consists not in doing what we like, but in having the right to do what we ought. That's JP2. It's one of my favorite quotes of all time, because every time I think about it, and I ask you to memorize that and to think about it, it helps to direct my actions. And it helps me to think about the freedoms that have been so costly to so many who have died to protect our freedoms, especially freedom of religion. But all of our freedoms, how precious they are, and how we take them for granted, and how we let people destroy those freedom or take them away because of fear, instead of going back to our faith. And I think this quote from JP2 really came into my life full force during COVID, because instead of erring on the side of freedom, people erred on the side of restriction, taking away our hard-won freedoms in the blink of an eye. And for what? For what they thought was safety, to be assured that they wouldn't contract this virus and die, or their loved ones, or they did all kinds of things without even questioning, even to the point where they were infringing on the freedom of other people to do what they should have the right to do. And so when we fall into that trap, that what we ought to do isn't according to the Lord, but according to government, according to science or so-called science or whatever it might be, so many times we think we're on the right track and we're doing the right thing, but we're not. And to get out of that trap, we need to do a lot of different things. But one of the things that I do all the time, I try to do as much as possible, is when I see a controversial thing that is popping up, I like to see what they're saying and then see what other news sources are saying, see what the Catholic Church is saying, what our leaders are saying, so that I can really think about what is happening. And then, of course, praying to the Lord to reveal what is true and what is right. And so these are ways that throughout the centuries people have come to know and love the Lord, because his truth is always at the center. And so when we trade freedom for the meaning of license, which is you're given the right to do something instead of having the God-given right, it turns everything around, and it leads to a culture of death, which is the quote from JP2. Decades ago, he specifically warned the United States, saying that we were embracing a culture of death through the institutionalization of abortion, euthanasia, and degradation of human life, treating vulnerable individuals as burdens rather than creations of inherent worth. So that, my friends, is a lot. But do we see how when we embrace license instead of true freedom, then that culture of death slowly but surely sneaks in. And it sneaks in through the concerted effort of many individuals. If you go back to Roe v. Wade, which was overturned, but not until it had done tremendous harm to millions and millions of unborn babies, as well as women who never recovered from their abortions, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. So pretty much decades of destruction of our fabric of our society, because the family is the fabric of our society. So when abortion and euthanasia, because euthanasia is on the rise now in many states, it is being brought into law. And we look to our neighbors to the north, Canada, who has more people who were euthanized. Last year was their number one cause of death. And people are choosing it because they don't know. And if we don't speak up, if we don't fight this culture of death and replace it with a culture of life, then human life as we know it, our rights, which are embedded in the Declaration of Independence, the moral truth, it will disappear. And it can happen so quickly because we are in an age of communication. So communication can be used for good or bad. You could be listening to Radio Maria and hearing all the wonderful programs that help to strengthen you in your faith and your knowledge of your faith, of the Catholic Church and the teachings, the prayer life, all the things that help you to grow into holiness. Or you could be listening to heavy metal music playing, which we now come to know that in the music industry, which is pretty upfront about these different things, it's all coming into the light, where they actually create music that distorts our normal rhythms and creates angst, a lot of anxiety, a lot of violence, just not from the words, but even from the music itself and the tempo and the beat. All of that is helping to bring about this culture of death. Because when we look at what is true and beautiful and good, we think of all the things of the Lord. But when we look at the culture of death, we see death, right? And not life, but death, a culture of death, which is being reiterated over and over again in many different ways, shapes, and forms. And when we talk about the degradation of human life that JP2 pointed out, we see how we are treating the vulnerable individuals as burdens rather than creations of inherent worth. Yesterday I was listening to a recreation of some of the different hardships the pilgrims had to endure, and how 2 ships were brought over, but one was destroyed and sabotaged, and they were very late getting here, so they ended up coming instead of in August when they could have gotten, established. They came during the winter months, and it was cold and it was brutal, and many of them died from sickness. But the narrator took time and effort to read various accounts that were left and have been found of the survivors and the founders of our nation. And they talked about how those vulnerable individuals who were sick and dying, and they knew that they were going to die, and they had a very small population of about 100 people in this camp. And they knew they didn't have enough material things to keep them warm. They know they also didn't have the material things of food and storage that they would need to survive that harsh winter. But when their people got sick, they gave them the food. They gave them the warm clothing. They took care of them instead of taking care of themselves. They treated the very vulnerable individuals in their community not as burdens, but with the inherent worth that children of God have by the virtue that they are children of God. And that means until the natural death. So taking care of them, even though it was an extreme hardship, in the middle of extreme hardship, it just made me realize how wonderful and how inspiring it is to know that people still believe, even in the midst of that kind of a hardship, and they knew that maybe they might be the next one to get sick and to die, that they still took the time to take care of their loved ones and all of the people in their community rather than to let them go. So a culture of death is translated into many things, not just actual death by abortion, euthanasia, murder, things like that, but the whole degradation of human life, of seeing people as property, to seeing people and treating them instead of with respect and honoring them for who they are as children of God, but seeing their utility. Are they worth anything? What are they worth? What good can they produce for us? So this culture of death has become so pervasive, and the culture of life has been trying to fight back over and over again. But right now, as JP2 talked about in the Eucharistic Congress of Philadelphia in 1976, 50 years ago, he talked about the final confrontation. Not just, that this culture of death is winning now, but there would be a final confrontation. And so that's part of the famous warning, is that a final confrontation between the church and the anti-church. He warned that Christians would face a society increasingly hostile to the gospel and the deposit of faith. And he was right, because here we are. And so when we talk about the church, we're not just talking about the Catholic Church. We are the church. And the anti-church are those that, we are the church who respects and knows that we are children of God. And because of that, we have a higher calling. We have a higher power that we answer to instead of the earthly. And yet the anti-church, well, all those that are for abortion, all of those for euthanasia, all of those who want cheap labor, all of those who want as much as they can get, no matter what it costs, and even to kick others down so they can have more power and more money and more greed. So we are those Christians who are facing that society not increasingly, but openly hostile to the gospel of life. That's the only gospel there is, right? And the deposit of the faith. Because if we lose sight that we have this deposit of faith to guide our moral decisions, to guide our society, to guide our families, to guide each one of us, then, as our Blessed Mother says in Medjugorje, that Satan is harvesting souls because of this confrontation. Those are that's the collateral damage, is that when we go offline and we just live in our own little bubble, or we and it's good that we hold the line, right? But if we're not spreading the gospel of life and fighting those hostile environments where Christians are being defeated for what they believe, Christians are fearful to actually live their faith and to talk about their faith, then more and more will drop out of the church, drop out of being Christians, drop out of the culture of life, and be gobbled up by the culture of death and Satan and his minions, whose only goal is to snatch as many souls as possible away from the Lord, because they know how precious we are to him. And they want to hurt him as much as possible. And they want to destroy us. Remember, chaos, death, and destruction are all signs of the Antichrist and the anti-church, because the anti-church, although many still find this hard to believe, but there's evidence, because the satanic sects that are out there, the Church of Satan, as well as Wiccans, all these kind of people who do all kinds of rituals and spells and curses and things like that. That's not the gospel of life. That's the gospel of death. But their sacrament is abortion. So anytime you see people who abortion is their big thing that they protect, because that is the best destructive force that they have to destroy families, to destroy individuals, to gain the souls of all these people, including the soul of our nation. And so there is this influence of materialism and watering down of Catholic doctrine that helps the culture of death to gain more and more ground. Pope John Paul II urged American church leaders back in 1979, when he came once again and he addressed all the bishops of the United States. He told them to stand firm against secularization, the influence of materialism, and the watering down of Catholic doctrine. That's how the culture of death spreads fastest and furthest. And that's also, if we combat materialism, secularization, and keep strong on the Catholic doctrine, living it and spreading that truth to all that we can, then that is how the culture of life wins. I see I'm at the bottom of the hour, so we're going to take a quick song. Sorry, I'm trying to get ready for my next one. And we're going to go a little bit deeper into JP2 and the culture of life and his recommendations to build that culture of life. He warned the bishops what they needed to guard against, but how do we strengthen the culture of life? How do we strengthen the Catholic Church, and how do we strengthen the next generation so that they too can live a life of freedom, doing the things that they ought? This is Mary Pyper with Marian Apparitions. We'll be back again in about 5 minutes, listening to this song. Thank you for being a part of Radio Maria.
You're listening to Radio Maria, a Catholic voice in your home. We now return to Marian Apparitions with your host, Mary Pyper.
Welcome back, everyone. I love sacred music. You know, they say that Gregorian chant is the one thing the devil can't stand. He loves all that, the hard rock and roll with the lyrics that are indecent to even know. And then we look at Gregorian chant, and maybe we don't understand all the words there, but we feel in our soul the beauty and the truth of whatever is being sung, and that there is a sacredness, a higher calling, as you have said it might be. And that's part of the root cause of the culture of death. It's grounded in relativism, secularism, and a distorted view of freedom that views absolute personal autonomy as paramount. There is no higher calling. There is no higher God. It is only us, and that we are our own gods. I was just listening not too long ago to a testimony of Alice Cooper, who I was so surprised. Apparently, he has found the Lord. And he was saying that most young people don't know, even though they know Jesus Christ, they know it as a swear word because they don't really know what it means when you talk about Jesus or when you say Jesus Christ is the Savior of the world. They don't have any concept. And as much as people think that they know, he said, the more they really don't know. And he said, and I didn't know until the Lord opened my eyes and I opened up my own mind to accept truth. And most people don't want to accept it. Well, because, as he said, because they want to be God themselves. They want to be the one that says what is right and what is wrong, what they can do and what they can't do. And that is the root cause. That's culture of death thinking, not high holiness thinking. And so how we think is how we act, and how we act is who we are. And we might think, well, we're not like that person who's doing bad things, but then we cross a line in our life where we are under an extreme trial, perhaps, and we're doing the unthinkable. And then when we go to the next side of that trial and tribulation, we come down that mountain, we see as we look back that it was difficult, but not too difficult because we stayed with the Lord. But those who leave the Lord, they're lost. And it's up to us to help pray them back to the Lord, to help give them the strength and support that they need so that they can make it through to the other side. Because so many times we make destructive decisions based on the trials that are in our life right then and there, and it's insurmountable. And there's a testimony of a young man who felt like his life was over. It would be better to end it than to continue it. And he actually went to the Brooklyn Bridge, or maybe it's the San Francisco Bridge. Anyway, a very tall, famous bridge. And he jumped. And he said as soon as his feet left the platform, left the bridge, he knew what a mistake it was. And he knew that he was falling to a certain death. Well, miraculously, and he attributes it all to the Lord, that the Lord heard his cry for help, and he was smashed into many different pieces, but he survived. And that's how we know, because of his testimony. But he said, as soon as I had convinced myself that I would be better off dead. He said, but I wasn't in my right mind, because as I was falling to what I thought was my certain death, I cried out to the Lord, and I could see that this was going to pass, this trial and tribulation that I thought I couldn't endure, that the Lord was going to give me strength to make it through. And so he says, I truly believe he heard my cry, and he gave me back my life so that I could tell others that what the media tells us, what our friends and family, what we convince ourselves all, that it's just too much, that we can't handle it, that when we turn to the Lord, we can handle it, because it's not us. It's the strength of the Lord, the grace that He's given us to get through the trial that we're in. So the root cause of this personal autonomy of destruction is really not from the Lord, but from Satan and the culture of death that we live in. And so it's hard for young people if they've never really experienced what it is to go through a hardship. Maybe they've had people who love them, who have taken care of them all their life, and they've never really known anything but comfort and happiness. And so when they do hit turbulent waters, so to speak, then they don't know what to do, and they think that it's over. And that's exactly what the devil wants them to think, because he wants to claim their soul. He does not see that that the souls that are in trouble, he knows how easily, once they turn back to God, how easily they can be saved, and he doesn't want that. So the core philosophy behind all of this is possible because of our higher institutions that are teaching this to our children, and they discard the knowledge that humans are made in the image of God. They reduce individuals to people who are just a functional value or economic productivity or something that they can use to get themselves better. And so once we start to do that and we see the worst of individuals and we assume the worst instead of assuming the best, then our philosophy changes, and it changes for us as well. You know, we don't think that it changes for us and our family, that these are the other people, the disparaging comments like that people are called, that are not their own. But then it starts to creep into your whole philosophy. So when your core philosophy, doesn't see individuals as made in the image and likeness of God, then the way that we respect them, the way that we treat them, the way that we think about them, it infiltrates everything that we do, and we can't help but live that philosophy. If we have the philosophy that we are made in the image of God, and not just made in His image and likeness, but here's what JP2 said. Not only are we God's creatures, in His infinite mercy, God has chosen us as His beloved people. Quote, for He is our God, and we are the people He shepherds, the flock He guides. He chose us in Christ, the Good Shepherd, who gave His life for His sheep. That's how precious we are. And who calls us to the banquet of His body and blood, the Holy Eucharist, which we are celebrating together this morning. So this was from a homily when he came here in 1979. And that's, we talk about made in the image and likeness of God, but we need to go deeper into that philosophy, that core philosophy, so that mercy, forgiveness, compassion, all these things, which are the culture of life, are available to us. We are His chosen people, His beloved people, not just people that He created, and some are good and some are bad, but as many of the great saints have been taught and it's been revealed to them, especially those who, great saints who have experienced apparitions, especially of purgatory, of demonic attacks on people. Saint Faustina, who saw the end of life struggle that happens between God and the devil for your soul. Things that we don't even contemplate or even think about, because people don't think about death as far as where will I end up. They might think of death in the culture of death sense, but everything's good, right? Like you have Protestant pastors who are blessing abortion clinics. You have many people who say I became a Satanist because a young lady proclaimed. because she believed in abortion and all the things that she believed in. That's when she looked at all the churches, that's who lined up with her beliefs. So she fell in line with the satanic cult instead of becoming a Christian. So, like I said, we're not thinking straight. We don't have the right thought process. And the more that we look at our educational system, the more we see that we are meant to not think, that mostly our schools are taught people to memorize things and correct answers, and everything is infiltrated with the point of view of the culture of death and the core philosophies of that culture, of materialism and things like that. And it's done in such a way, in many cases, that we don't even know that it's being done. And that, my friends, is one way that we can fight back and bring back the culture of life, so that people do realize that our God chose us, He loves us, and He will do anything, including die for us, which is what Jesus did. He gave His life for His sheep, for us. And then that wasn't just the end of it, even though it was the beginning, but the Holy Eucharist, He gives us His body, blood, soul, and divinity, so that we can become more and more like Him. Remember, until it's no longer I, but Christ inside me. So Christ is doing the things because He loves us so much. He wants us to help and rescue those who have fallen. So Pope John Paul II talked about the first seminary in the United States was established under the protection of the Virgin Mother of God, as was America's first Catholic college for women. Since these heroic beginnings, men and women of every race and social class have built the Catholic community we see in America today, a great spiritual movement of witness, of apostolate, of good works, of Catholic institutions and organizations. That, my friends, is the culture of life that has been built over the 250 years that the United States has been independent. And independent from the culture of death? No, because it's come back. All the things that we denied and we fought so valiantly and won our independence from has now been attacking us from all corners of the earth. And that's because Satan realizes the power of goodness. And that when JP2 talked about heroic beginnings, and you might not think, well, establishing, a Catholic college or a seminary, that's just what you do. Well, no, it was heroic because there was not the means or the ways to establish these things, but through sweat and blood and great, great sacrifice. And it wasn't just for Catholics, it was for people of all races, all social classes. And if you've ever read Matthew Kelly's Catholicism, Rediscovering Catholicism, when that came out, it was revolutionary because there had never been a regular book, not just a historic history book, but those are few and far between, Catholic history books. But it helped us to see how pivotal and how necessary the Catholic Church and all the missionary work that was done to establish hospitals to care for everyone, to establish higher institutions of learning and for all schools and all classes, even the poor. There's so much that the United States has been founded on and has been accomplished here because of the good works of so many who denied themselves to take care of the children of God. And so these Catholic institutions and organizations, we have to help them to remain strong because many are falling. Many are now accepting doctrine that is far from the Catholic Church's teachings on many different moral aspects. And so when we look at JP2 and his prophetic message of 50 years ago, there is that yearning to go back 50 years and be strong again as we were, and not let the devil take away the culture of life and turn it into the anti-church, the culture of death. He talks, Pope John Paul II talks about his 2 years ago at Denver, which was the big Catholic gathering of young people. He said, I was deeply impressed by the vitality of America's young people as they bore enthusiastic witness to their love of Christ and showed that they were not afraid of the demands of the gospel. There we go again, right? Afraid of the demands of the gospel. It is demanding. I mean, to do the right thing, especially when nobody else around you is doing it, or at least you feel that way. You feel isolated. You feel you're the only one and everybody else is profiting by doing the wrong things, the things that are illegal, immoral, and then you're just barely able to survive, and they are thriving and flourishing with the best of materialism can buy. Well, we need to not be afraid of the demands of the gospel, to not be afraid of hard things, of doing hard things, because the gospel has always been demanding, because anything worth fighting for is truth, goodness, and beauty. And when we let that be destroyed bit by bit by bit, or all at once, and we give up, then what is left? So Pope John Paul II offered his Mass for this reason, and I think it would be something very worthy for all of us to offer our Sunday Mass, our daily prayers, our daily Mass. Here's what he offered it for: a strengthening of that vitality and Christian courage at every level of the Church in the United States, among the laity, among the priests, the religious, among my brother bishops. The whole Church is preparing for the third Christian millennium, the challenge of the great Jubilee year of 2000. Now we're at 2026. It's the new evangelization, and that means a deepening of faith and a vigorous response to the Christian vocation to holiness and service. So, a deepening of faith and a vigorous response to the Christian vocation to holiness and service. So let's take us personally. Let's look back over the last year. Has our faith been deepened? Or are we kind of at the same place? Or maybe it's more diluted. Maybe it's more shallow. Have we been able to deepen our faith by the things that we do, the life that we live? And is there a vigorous response to the Christian vocation to holiness? In other words, are we out there actively doing things? Or is it constantly on our mind that we're striving for holiness, that we want nothing more than to be with our Lord? Are we keeping at least up with our daily rosary, Mass whenever we can go daily? Are we going to confession at least on a monthly basis so that we're growing in holiness? Are there certain things and devotions that we've dropped because we'd rather scroll for an extra 20 minutes or an hour, scroll on our iPads or on our computers, read about all the maybe things that are going on in the world instead of thinking about what's going to happen to us in the next? And what about service? How are we serving our families, our communities, our church? Are we even serving them on all different levels, little levels as well as big, meaningful levels? Because, as I work here at my parish, it takes so many volunteers. And quite frankly, it's the same people many, many times. They say the 20-80 rule, that 20% of your people are the ones who are going to be volunteering 80% of the time, or 100% of the time in some cases. And I'm seeing that more and more. And it's not so much that they don't have the time. even though many think they don't have the time. But they don't even do service in little ways. So instead of committing for a whole week, maybe you can't do that because the way you work or your commitments at home. But what if you were to find a way to help and serve an hour here, an hour there, even a half hour? That frees up someone else who has to now maybe volunteer 5 hours during a day. Now they can be with their family for an hour more and an hour less of service. Or maybe it's a different kind of service. Or have you ever thought about how serving your family is really a path to holiness? I know in the past I've talked about many of the different apparitions and how service to their own family, building up that culture of life, that encouragement, helping them to know and learn and live their faith joyfully. Living life joyfully is the culture of life. Because when we let anxieties, fears, and destructive forces enter into our home, our sanctuary, then it starts to eat away and get a foothold. And once that foothold is there, it's hard to get rid of, right? So we have to prevent that. And so our vocation to holiness is our first and foremost, our call. And service, that's how we help to grow in holiness, because service is not easy. But the more that we serve others, the more we serve Christ through others, the more souls will be saved and the higher the sanctification. So our Pope John Paul II, the gospel reading he points out is Luke 17, increase our faith. This must be our constant prayer, he says. Faith is always demanding because faith leads us beyond ourselves. It leads us directly to God. Faith also imparts a vision of life's purpose and stimulates us to action. The gospel of Jesus Christ is not a private opinion, a remote spiritual ideal, or a mere program for personal growth, which is what many people treat it as. The gospel is the power which can transform the world. The gospel is no abstraction. It is the living person of Jesus Christ, the Word of God, the reflection of the Father's glory, the incarnate Son who reveals the deepest meaning of our humanity and the noble destiny to which the whole human family is called. Christ has commanded us to let the light of the gospel shine forth in our service to society. How can we profess faith in God's word and then refuse to let it inspire and direct our thinking, our activity, our decisions, and our responsibilities towards one another? Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that inspiring? Isn't it something that you feel in your soul as you're hearing that or reading that? Those are the kind of reminders that we need to remind not just our own selves, but our families, our co-workers. Maybe in those words, maybe not. I remember I was on a council for our city here, and I had just read JP2's theme for service for that year. Each year, the Pontifical Institute comes with a main aspect of service and how, a beautiful little quote that is their motto for the year. And so I thought, wow, that's inspiring. So I brought it to the meeting, and everybody goes, wow, I just love that. I love it. I didn't tell them where I got it from. And they were just overjoyed. Yeah, let's adopt that for our city. And then finally someone says, well, I really like it, but it sounds kind of like churchy. And everybody kind of looked at them and they go, well, most of our community here is Christian. So we are actually a community of churches, mostly Protestant here, but a couple very big Catholic parishes as well. And so it was adopted, and it went on for a couple years, and it was kind of the motto of our city. And that, my friends, God gives us little ways that at just the right time. I happened to read that right before I went to that meeting, and I thought, wow, this fits our meeting exactly. And I didn't shrink away from, acting on that inspiration, because I could see God had given it to me at just the right time, so I could come very excited about it and present it to the committee so that our community could benefit from it. So we can profess our faith in God in many different ways. We have to refuse to let the culture of death override the culture of life. We have to have our core philosophy, our core gospel, which is the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we need to proclaim it. And we need to proclaim it joyfully, because when we do, people listen because they're waiting for that. They're hungry for that. They know that without God, everything falls apart. And with Him, all things are possible. Everybody's looking for miracles. How will you inspire someone today so that they can have the miracle of Jesus in their life again? This is Mary Pyper with Marian Apparitions. I'll be back again next Wednesday. Until then, increase your faith, live your faith joyfully, so that all the world knows that Jesus Christ is King.
Thank you so much for listening to the Radio Maria podcasts. It's thanks to listeners like you who donate that enable us to continue delivering quality content to listeners around the world. If you'd like to contribute and help us keep spreading the message of Our Lady's Son, please consider making a donation. You can reach us at 888-40-80201 or simply visit our donations tab on our website at radiomaria.us. Your generosity truly makes a difference. This has been a Radio Maria production.